I shall be your children's favorite eccentric aunt who tells inappropriate stories and keeps too many cats. Charlotte sighed. You're too young to surrender to such a fate. On the contrary, 7 seasons have taught me the prudence of accepting reality. I shall return to the country after this season and open that school for girls we've discussed. Teaching mathematics to young ladies will be far more satisfying than pretending to be witless to secure a husband. This had long been her plan, her true desire. A small academy where girls might learn more than watercolors and the pianoforte. The freedom of her own establishment, modest though it would be. Independence was the consolation prize for failing at the marriage market, but increasingly it seemed the superior option. Charlotte's reply was lost as the music ended and a palpable hush fell over the ballroom. Lydia followed her cousin's wide-eyed gaze to the entrance, where the formidable Duchess of Westmoreland was announcing a latecomer. His Grace, the Duke of Wexford. Every marriageable woman straightened her posture, every ambitious mother calculated her daughter's prospects, every gentleman stiffened with wariness. Zachary Wyndhurst, the 8th Duke of Wexford, had returned to London. The Dark Duke, Charlotte breathed. I didn't think he'd show his face this season after what happened with Lord Merrick's daughter. Lydia observed the man with clinical detachment. Tall and broad-shouldered, with raven hair and a countenance that appeared carved from marble, the Duke's reputation preceded him like a threatening storm cloud. Infamously reclusive, breathtakingly wealthy, and possessed of a temperament that sent lesser men scurrying from his path, Wexford was a force of nature rather than a man. What precisely did happen with Lord Merrick's daughter? Lydia inquired, more from intellectual curiosity than genuine interest. No one knows exactly, Charlotte whispered. Only that he called on her 3 times, then abruptly cut the connection. She was found weeping in the conservatory at Lady Hertford's ball, and by week's end, the entire family had departed for their country estate. Some say he made her an offer, then rescinded it when he discovered some fault in her character. More likely he discovered she possessed a character at all, Lydia remarked dryly. Men of his station prefer decorative wives, not thinking ones. Charlotte gasped. Lydia, mind your tongue if anyone heard. Who would hear? I am functionally invisible. She sipped her lemonade. The advantage of being a confirmed spinster is the liberty to speak one's mind. The evening proceeded as all had before it. Lydia maintained her post, observing the social machinations around her with the dispassionate eye of a naturalist studying insects. She had just decided to suggest their departure when a curious ripple of whispers spread through the room. The Duke of Wexford was moving among the wallflowers, an unprecedented occurrence that sent the patronesses into flutters of speculation. Lydia paid it no mind until a tall shadow fell across her chair and a deep voice addressed her directly. Lady Worthington. She looked up, startled to find the Duke himself standing before her, his expression inscrutable. Your Grace, she replied, rising to curtsy with mechanical precision. I believe you dropped this. He extended his hand, and upon his palm lay a small notebook bound in worn blue leather, her mathematics journal in which she recorded her ongoing studies. Lydia felt the blood drain from her face. The little book contained not only equations but her private observations on society, none of them flattering, if he had opened it. I assure you, my lady, your secrets remain your own, he said, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. Though I confess myself intrigued by your work on differential calculus. Few at Cambridge demonstrate such elegant proofs. She accepted the notebook with trembling fingers. You recognized the mathematics. I did. More surprising still, I understood them. One corner of his mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile, but a suggestion that one might exist beneath his forbidding demeanor. Would you honor me with the next dance? The question was so unexpected that Lydia answered with uncharacteristic honesty. I don't dance, Your Grace. Everyone dances, Lady Worthington. I meant that no one asks me. I am asking. The music of a waltz began, and Lydia found herself being led to the floor in a state of shock. The assembly's collective gasp was audible as the Duke placed his hand at her waist. You realize you've just ensured I will be the subject of speculation for at least a fortnight. she said, as they began to move. You underestimate yourself. It will be a month at minimum. His blue-gray eyes assessed her with unsettling thoroughness. You've been attending these functions for 7 seasons, yet you sit apart watching. Why? The same reason you've avoided them for 3 years. Society holds little appeal when one sees it clearly. His eyebrows rose marginally. And what do you see, Lady Worthington? A marketplace where women are goods to be bartered, and men are purchasers seeking the best value. She realized too late the impropriety of her response. Forgive me, that was unconscionably blunt. On the contrary, it was refreshingly honest. But if you view marriage as mere commerce, why participate at all? Familial obligation, she answered simply, though this is to be my final season. I have plans that do not include this endless parade. Plans, he echoed, guiding her through a turn with unexpected grace for a man of his imposing stature. I find myself curious about these plans that supersede society's expectations. For the remainder of the dance, Lydia found herself describing her vision for a girls' academy, tentatively at first, then with growing animation as the Duke asked insightful questions rather than dismissing her ambitions. When the music ended, she realized with surprise that she had genuinely enjoyed herself. You dance quite well for someone who claims not to, he remarked as he escorted her back to her seat. And you converse quite well for a man reputed to terrify debutantes into fleeing the country. A startled laugh escaped him, a rich, deep sound that drew stares from nearby onlookers. Touché, Lady Worthington. I look forward to our next conversation. With that, he bowed and departed, leaving Lydia to face Charlotte's wide-eyed astonishment and the undisguised curiosity of every person in attendance. What just happened? Charlotte demanded in a whisper. Lydia opened her mouth to dismiss the encounter, then closed it again as she realized she had no logical explanation. I haven't the faintest idea, she admitted. The next morning, Lydia was roused from sleep by her maid's excited announcement that a package had arrived. Still in her nightrail, she opened the parcel to discover a leather-bound volume. Philosophy Naturalis Principia Mathematica by Sir Isaac Newton, the original Latin text, not a translation. A note accompanied it, for your Academy's future library. Intellectual discourse should not be restricted by gender. W. Charlotte, who had rushed to Lydia's townhouse upon hearing of the delivery, paced the morning room in a state of high agitation. This is beyond improper, Lydia. A gift without the sanction of family, people will talk. People always talk, Lydia replied, running her fingers reverently over the book's cover. Besides, it's hardly a compromising gift. It's Newton, not poetry or jewels. The Duke of Wexford doesn't make social calls or send gifts to anyone. Something is afoot. Lydia carefully set the book aside. Perhaps he merely appreciates having encountered someone who doesn't simper or cower in his presence. Or perhaps he's toying with you as he did with Lord Merrick's daughter. A week passed, during which Lydia received 3 more scholarly texts and an invitation to view the Duke's collection of scientific instruments. Each delivery was accompanied by a note containing a mathematical problem or philosophical question that inevitably led to a written exchange of ideas. These intellectual conversations by correspondence became the brightest point of Lydia's days. The Duke's mind was formidable, his knowledge extensive, and his willingness to consider her perspectives without condescension was unprecedented in her experience with gentlemen. For the first time, she found herself anticipating social functions in the hope of encountering him, which made it all the more crushing when he failed to appear at 3 consecutive events. Perhaps he's been called to his estates on business, Charlotte suggested as they prepared for Lady Westmoreland's musicale. Lydia adjusted her modest pearl earrings with forced nonchalance. Or perhaps, like all men of his station, he quickly tired of his oddity and has moved on to more conventional amusements. You don't believe that? I do, Lydia insisted, and it changes nothing. My plans remain as they were. In 6 weeks, I return to Worthington Manor to begin preparations for my school. Yet she could not deny the hollow feeling that had settled in her chest since the Duke's correspondence had ceased. She had foolishly allowed herself to believe, if only briefly, that someone might value her mind, might see her. The disappointment was keener for having tasted that possibility. The musicale was excruciating, not because of the indifferent talent on display, but because Lydia found herself watching the door, hope rising and falling with each new arrival. By the time Miss Penelope Fairchild began her third sonata, Lydia had retreated to the terrace for air and solitude. "You've abandoned the field of cultural enrichment, I see." The Duke's voice startled her so thoroughly that she nearly toppled the potted fern beside her. He emerged from the shadows, impeccably dressed in black evening attire that emphasized his commanding presence. "Your Grace," she managed, cursing the betraying tremor in her voice. "I had not expected to see you this evening." Evidently, he approached with measured steps. "You're displeased with me." "Not at all. Your social calendar is your own concern. Yet you responded to my last letter with uncharacteristic brevity and have not acknowledged the subsequent two." Lydia frowned. "I received no subsequent letters." The Duke's expression darkened. "I sent them to your cousin's address, as with the others." A moment of silence stretched between them before understanding dawned on Lydia's face. "Charlotte," she breathed. "She's been intercepting them. May I ask why your cousin might take such a liberty?" "She believes," Lydia hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "She believes you are toying with me, as you reportedly did with Lord Merrick's daughter." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "I see the gossips have been industrious. Allow me to correct the record. I called upon Miss Merrick 3 times and found her to be a pleasant young woman whose interests extended no further than fashion and gossip. When I realized we shared no common ground for meaningful conversation, I politely withdrew. Any tears she shed were the product of her mother's disappointment, not mine." "And why are you telling me this?" "Because unlike Miss Merrick, you engage my mind and challenge my assumptions. Because your letters have become the highlight of my otherwise tedious days." He took a step closer. "Because I find myself thinking of you at inappropriate moments and wondering if you might be persuaded to reconsider your views on marriage as a mere transaction." Lydia's heart began a treacherous acceleration. "I don't understand what you're suggesting." "I believe you do. You're far too intelligent to misunderstand." He reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "What if marriage could be a partnership of equals? An intellectual alliance as well as a social one?" "Such marriages don't exist in our world," she replied, though her conviction wavered. "They could." His gaze held hers with unsettling intensity. "We could create one." Before Lydia could formulate a response, the terrace doors opened and Charlotte appeared, her expression transforming from concern to alarm at the sight of the Duke holding Lydia's hand. "Excuse me, Your Grace, but my cousin is needed inside," she announced with brittle politeness. The Duke released Lydia's hand but not her gaze. "We will continue this conversation, Lady Worthington." "Count on it." The following morning brought no less than 6 letters from the Duke, delivered directly to Lydia rather than through Charlotte. Each contained a segment of their previous correspondence that had been withheld from her, along with his responses. "You deliberately kept these from me," Lydia accused when Charlotte arrived for their planned shopping expedition. Her cousin had the grace to look abashed. "I was protecting you." "From what? Intellectual stimulation." "The novel experience of being valued for my mind." "From false hope," Charlotte's composure cracked. "Lydia, he's a duke. Dukes don't marry penniless viscounts' daughters who speak their minds and solve equations for pleasure. They marry wealth or political connections or great beauty." "I'm well aware of that," Lydia replied coldly, "which is precisely why I never harbored romantic notions about the man. I simply enjoyed our discourse." "Then why are you so upset about the letters?" Lydia turned away, unable to articulate the confused tangle of emotions in her breast. "Because for once, someone saw me, truly saw me, instead of looking through me or past me or at some imagined version of what a lady should be." "And you took that away." Charlotte's expression softened. "Oh, Lydia, you've fallen in love with him." "Don't be absurd. I've merely grown accustomed to our exchanges." "So accustomed that you've checked the window 17 times since I arrived, hoping for another letter." Lydia's flush betrayed her before she could form a denial. The truth was both simpler and more terrifying than she could admit. Somewhere between Newton's laws of motion and discussions of educational philosophy, the Duke had dismantled her carefully constructed defenses. She had begun to imagine impossibilities, a life where she was not merely tolerated but desired, not just for her body or her family connections, but for her mind. It was this dangerous fantasy that she was contemplating 3 days later when she entered Hatchard's bookshop on Piccadilly seeking distraction. She was examining a volume on modern educational theories when a familiar voice addressed her from the adjacent aisle. "Their section on natural philosophy is woefully inadequate," the Duke observed, appearing at her elbow with casual grace, "though their collection of Greek and Roman classics is quite respectable." Lydia nearly dropped her book. "Your Grace." "What a coincidence." "Not entirely." His lips curved in a hint of a smile. "I may have noticed your carriage outside. Have you resorted to following me now?" "Only because you've been notably absent from recent social gatherings." She shelved the book with deliberate precision. "I've been occupied with preparations for my departure. As I mentioned, this is my final season." "Yes, your academy." He guided her toward a quieter corner of the shop. "I've given considerable thought to your educational philosophy. Your emphasis on practical knowledge alongside classical learning is quite progressive, yet entirely necessary if women are ever to achieve any measure of independence." "I agree. Which is why I've taken the liberty of securing a property that might suit your purposes better than the cramped quarters above the milliner's shop in your village that you described in your 3rd letter." Lydia stared at him. "You've what?" "The former Westhaven Academy near Bath. It closed last year when the headmaster retired, but the buildings are sound, dormitories for 40 girls, classrooms, a small laboratory, and extensive gardens. The library is particularly fine." "I don't understand." "I'm offering you the property, Lady Worthington, for your school." The generosity of the gesture, the implications of it, left her momentarily speechless. When she found her voice, it emerged as a whisper. "Why would you do this?" "Because education matters, because minds like yours should not be wasted, because," he hesitated, then continued with careful precision, "because I find myself invested in your ambitions." "Such generosity would create an inappropriate obligation between us," she replied, though her heart raced at the possibilities his offer presented. "Only if you view it as charity rather than investment." His eyes held her steadily. "I propose a partnership. You provide the educational vision and daily governance. I provide the property and financial backing. The profits, modest though they may be, would be shared equally." "A business arrangement," she said slowly, "if you prefer to frame it as such." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Though I confess, I had hoped for a more comprehensive partnership." The implication hung in the air between them, electric with possibility. Before Lydia could respond, the bookshop door opened, admitting a flutter of fashionable ladies who immediately recognized the Duke and began maneuvering in their direction. "Not here," he murmured. "Come to Wexford House tomorrow at 2. We can discuss the details without interruption." The prospect of visiting a bachelor's home unchaperoned was scandalous enough that Lydia should have refused immediately. Instead, she found herself nodding. "Tomorrow, then." That night, Lydia barely slept, her mind alternately racing with excitement about the school and spiraling with anxiety about the Duke's true intentions. By morning, she had convinced herself that the entire arrangement was an elaborate scheme to compromise her reputation. Why would the most eligible peer in England need to resort to such tactics? Charlotte demanded when Lydia voiced this fear. If he wanted a mistress, he could have his pick of willing women without the complication of establishing a school. Then what does he want? Charlotte's expression softened. Perhaps exactly what he's implied, a partner who challenges his mind as well as captures his interest. That's impossible. Is it? You've spent 7 seasons believing no man would value your intelligence, and now that one clearly does, you're determined to find sinister motives. Charlotte took her hands. Lydia, what if you're wrong? What if everything you've believed about marriage and men is simply incorrect? The question haunted her as her carriage approached the imposing facade of Wexford House. The Duke himself received her in a sun-filled library that stretched 2 stories high, with rolling ladders and reading nooks tucked between towering shelves. "This is magnificent," Lydia breathed, forgetting her nervousness in the face of such literary splendor. "My sanctuary," the Duke agreed, watching her explore with evident pleasure. "Few appreciate it properly." For the next hour, they discussed the particulars of the school, curriculum, staffing, governance structure, with the Duke displaying not only genuine interest but valuable insights. He showed her architectural drawings of the Westhaven property and presented a detailed financial prospectus that recognized her academy as a serious educational venture rather than a charitable endeavor. As their discussion wound to its natural conclusion, Lydia found herself both impressed by his thoroughness and increasingly confused by his motives. "This arrangement is remarkably generous, Your Grace," she said finally. "But I still don't understand why you're doing this. What do you gain?" The Duke set aside the papers and regarded her thoughtfully. "Must I have an ulterior motive? In my experience, men of your station don't invest in the aspirations of unmarriageable spinsters without reason. Perhaps that is because you've encountered the wrong sort of men." He rose and moved to stand before her chair. "Or perhaps I do have selfish motives. Perhaps I wish to keep you in England rather than losing you to spinsterhood and a village school. Perhaps I find the prospect of your brilliant mind being wasted on teaching basic arithmetic to 12-year-olds intolerable." Lydia stood, needing to feel less at a disadvantage. "Why should that matter to you?" "Because, Lady Worthington, against all logic and my own better judgment, I have developed a profound admiration for you that extends well beyond intellectual appreciation." His voice remained steady, though something vulnerable flickered in his eyes. "In plain terms, I find myself hoping that our partnership might extend beyond this educational venture." "You can't possibly be suggesting—" "I am precisely suggesting that." He took her hands, his touch sending an alarming current up her arms. "Marry me, Lydia." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "You're not serious." "I have never been more serious about anything in my life. But I'm nobody. I have no fortune, no exceptional beauty, no powerful family connections. You have something far more valuable, a mind that challenges and delights me, courage that does not quail before my reputation, and honesty that refuses to pander to my position." His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "Do you know how rare that is, how precious?" Lydia withdrew her hands, turning away to collect her scattered thoughts. "This is madness. The Ton would never accept such a match." "The Ton will accept whatever I tell them to accept. I am, as they never cease to remind me, a duke." A note of wry humor colored his voice. "Besides, I have no interest in their approval, only in yours." "You hardly know me," she protested. "I know that you prefer Milton to Shakespeare, but consider both inferior to Mary Wollstonecraft. I know you believe that education is the path to women's liberation from societal constraints. I know you take your tea with honey instead of sugar and have a secret fondness for almond biscuits." His eyes crinkled at her surprise. "Yes, I've been paying attention, Lady Worthington. Perhaps more than you realize." The sincerity in his expression was her undoing. 7 seasons of invisibility had not prepared her for being truly seen, being known in ways that mattered. "I've believed all my life that marriage was merely a transaction," she said softly, "a necessary evil for women with no other options. And now I'm not certain what to believe." He stepped closer, his presence both intimidating and exhilarating. "Then allow me to present an alternative theory. Marriage, between the right people, can be a partnership of minds and hearts, a union that enhances rather than diminishes both parties." That sounds suspiciously like a fairy tale. Or a hypothesis waiting to be tested. He lifted her chin with gentle fingers. "Will you help me prove it, Lydia?" The temptation to surrender to the impossible possibility he offered was overwhelming. Yet something held her back, a lifetime of rational caution that could not be discarded in a moment, even one as extraordinary as this. I need time, she whispered. This is unexpected. Disappointment flickered across his features, but he nodded. Of course, rational decisions require adequate consideration. He stepped back, resuming his more formal demeanor. The offer stands, both the school and the other matter. Take whatever time you need. Lydia departed Wexford House in a state of emotional turmoil, unlike anything she had experienced. For 7 days she wrestled with her decision, alternately convinced she was being offered a miracle and certain she was falling prey to an elaborate deception. On the 8th day, disaster struck. Charlotte burst into Lydia's bedchamber, face pale with distress. "It's in the morning papers," she gasped, thrusting a copy of the gossip sheet toward Lydia. "Someone saw you entering Wexford House unchaperoned. The speculation is vivid." The printed words swam before Lydia's eyes. Confirmed spinster ensnares Duke and secret liaison at Wexford House. The anonymous author insinuated that Lydia had set a trap for the Duke, using her blue-stocking wiles to compromise his honor. "It's ruinous," Charlotte moaned. "Your reputation." "Was hardly sterling to begin with," Lydia replied with forced calm, though her hands trembled. "No one will be surprised that the odd Worthington girl finally disgraced herself." Yet even as she affected indifference, Lydia felt the full weight of the scandal. Her school would never recover from such a taint on its founder's character. No respectable family would send their daughters to an academy established by a woman of questionable virtue. Everything she had worked toward, everything she had planned, destroyed by a single act of imprudence. The Duke would distance himself now, surely. Whatever genuine regard he might have felt would be smothered by scandal. The property, the financial backing, the partnership, all would be withdrawn, and the proposal, that impossible, miraculous offer, would evaporate like morning mist. Lydia donned her plainest walking dress and a heavy veil. "I need air," she announced, ignoring Charlotte's protests. In truth, she needed solitude to gather her fractured composure and decide what remained possible for her future. Hyde Park was nearly deserted at the unfashionable hour she chose, allowing her to walk the paths without encountering acquaintances. She had just turned toward the Serpentine when a tall figure stepped into her path. "Lady Worthington," the Duke said, removing his hat. "I hoped I might find you here." Lydia froze, grateful for the concealment of her veil. "Your Grace, I would have thought you'd be keeping a safe distance from me this morning." "And why would I do that?" "The papers." "Ah, yes. The creative fiction currently circulating through London drawing rooms." His tone was surprisingly unconcerned. "Apparently I've been ensnared by a scheming spinster with designs on my fortune." "How terrible for me." Despite everything, a reluctant laugh escaped her. "You're not angry." "At the gossips, certainly. At you, not in the slightest." He gestured toward a secluded bench. "May we sit? There are matters we should discuss." Once seated, Lydia lifted her veil, wanting to see his expression clearly. "I understand if you wish to withdraw your offer regarding the school. The association with me would be problematic now. On the contrary, I've already instructed my solicitors to finalize the purchase and transfer the property to our joint educational trust." He studied her with those penetrating eyes. "Unless you've reconsidered." "No, but," she hesitated. "Surely you realize that this scandal makes any connection between us inadvisable." "Actually, it makes one particular connection, not merely advisable but necessary." "I don't understand." "The damage to your reputation can be repaired in exactly one way." He took her hands. "Marry me, Lydia, immediately. Today, if possible." She stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I am entirely serious. The Duke of Wexford cannot marry a woman whose reputation has been compromised by his actions without appearing to have been forced into it." His grip tightened. "But if we marry immediately, by special license, which I have already secured, society will assume I orchestrated the entire situation to overcome your reluctance." "That's absurd." "That's the ton." A wry smile curved his lips. "They will happily believe I manufactured a scandal to secure the woman I wanted, but they would never accept that I might marry to repair a damaged reputation. Pride is a powerful force, especially among the aristocracy." Lydia shook her head. This is madness. You're sacrificing yourself to save me from disgrace. I'm doing nothing of the sort. His expression grew serious. I'm seizing an opportunity to obtain what I truly want, you, as my wife, partner, and intellectual equal, while simultaneously silencing the gossips who would otherwise make your life intolerable. He released one of her hands to reach into his coat. I had planned a more romantic setting for this, but circumstances demand adaptation. From his pocket he withdrew a small velvet box. Inside nestled a ring unlike any Lydia had seen, not the traditional diamonds or sapphires, but an exquisite celestial design with a central pearl surrounded by tiny stars crafted from moonstones. The cosmos, she breathed, recognizing the astronomical inspiration. For the woman who taught me that intellectual pursuit is its own form of poetry. He removed the ring from its box. This isn't about scandal or obligation, Lydia. This is about choosing a life partner who challenges and inspires me. Someone whose mind I respect and whose courage I admire. Someone I've come to love. The final word hung between them, impossible yet undeniable. Love, she echoed, the concept foreign on her tongue. I've never believed in it as anything but a romantic fiction invented to disguise the transactional nature of marriage. And now, the question echoed their earlier conversation, but this time Lydia found her answer clear. Now I find myself contemplating the possibility that I've been catastrophically wrong about a great many things. Including me. Especially you, she met his gaze directly. I've spent my life believing that independence was the only path to fulfillment for a woman like me, that marriage would inevitably mean surrendering my identity and ambitions. And yet you've offered me not subjugation, but partnership. Not limitation, but expansion. She drew a steadying breath. I find myself wondering if perhaps I've confused independence with isolation, if true freedom might sometimes be found in connection rather than separation. The hope that bloomed in his eyes was almost unbearable in its intensity. Is that a yes, Lady Worthington? It's a recognition that my previous understanding of marriage was woefully incomplete. She felt a smile, genuine, unguarded, spread across her face. Yes, Your Grace, I will marry you. Not because scandal demands it, but because you've shown me that transactions can become transformations when entered into with the right person. 3 weeks later, Lydia stood in the drawing room of Wexford House, now her home, gazing out at the garden where a small army of workers was constructing a modern observatory. A wedding gift, the Duke, Zachary, as she was learning to call him, had explained. For stargazing and mathematical calculations, I thought we might collaborate on astronomical observations. The gesture epitomized everything that had turned her world upside down. Here was a man who didn't merely tolerate her interests, but actively encouraged them, who saw her intellect not as a defect to be hidden, but as a quality to be celebrated. Contemplating the cosmos, my love. His voice came from behind her, followed by the warmth of his arms encircling her waist. Contemplating how thoroughly you've disrupted all my carefully constructed theories about marriage, she replied, leaning back against him. I was so certain it would mean the end of my intellectual pursuits. Instead, you find yourself with a personal library, scientific instruments, and funding for your academy. His chuckle vibrated against her back. How disappointing. Lydia turned in his arms. The most disappointing part is discovering that you were right. About what specifically? I'm right about so many things, it's difficult to keep track. She swatted his arm for his teasing. About marriage being a partnership rather than a transaction. About finding freedom within connection rather than only in isolation. His expression softened. I merely offered a hypothesis. You were brave enough to test it. The preliminary results are promising, she admitted, rising on tiptoe to press a kiss to his jaw, though further experimentation may be required. A lifetime of it, I should think. He captured her lips in a proper kiss that still had the power to make her knees weaken. After all, thorough research is the foundation of good science. And good marriages, she suggested when they parted, especially those. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Tell me, Lady Wexford, are you content with your decision to abandon spinsterhood? Lydia pretended to consider the question seriously. Well, I did sit alone at every ball for 7 seasons. It seems a shame to waste all that practice. Ah, but you'll never sit alone again, he promised, drawing her close. Not at balls, not in life. And in that moment, surrounded by the evidence of his regard, in the form of books and telescopes, and plans for a school where girls would learn to value their minds, Lydia recognized the final transformation of her beliefs. Love, far from being a pretty fiction, was the most practical force of all, the element that turned transactions into partnerships and independence into something greater still. A life shared, rather than merely navigated. A journey undertaken together with all its challenges and discoveries. No, she agreed, resting her head against his chest, not alone anymore.